some seats up here, and I believe that they're bringing in some others. So please find a seat. We'll go ahead and begin. My name is Jeffrey Babb, and I am the Stan Sigman Professor of Business in the Paul and Virginia Engler College of Business. Welcome to the inaugural Stan Sigman Leadership and Innovation Series. This series is a result of a partnership between the Friends of Stan Sigman, the Paul and Virginia Engler College of Business, and West Texas A&M University. The series was conceived to honor Stan Sigman as a leader, a visionary, and most of all, a local boy done good. Mr. Sigman was born in Lubbock, Texas, and attained a Bachelor of Science here in the College of Business when it was called West Texas State University in 1970. He's an alum. Mr. Sigman is known for a celebrated career in the telecommunications industry, where, through years of hard work, Mr. Sigman advanced to President and Chief Executive Officer of Southwestern Bell Mobile Systems. He's the Group President of SBC National Operations, President and Chief Officer of Singular Wireless. Mr. Sigman is also probably most known to all of us, other than being a local boy done good, as being instrumental in the leadership process at AT&T that partnered with Apple to bring us the iPhone, which is certainly an innovative revolution in our society. Today we welcome Ralph de la Vega as our first speaker in the Stan Sigman Leadership and Innovation Series. Mr. de la Vega is the former Vice Chairman of AT&T, President and CEO of AT&T Mobile and Business Solutions, President and CEO of AT&T Mobility, Chief Operating Officer of Singular Wireless, and was the President of Bell South Latin America. So that's quite a resume. As a close contemporary of Stan's during his days at Singular and AT&T, Mr. de la Vega understands the virtue of values as a key component of the leadership that often leads to vital innovation. Mr. de la Vega has shared his own life stories and lessons in his book, Obstacles Welcome. It's a good read. I think you'll be interested in it, certainly after this session. And it's called Obstacles Welcome, Turn Adversity into Advantage in Business and Life. His experiences and perspectives are highly motivational, and Mr. de la Vega is an ardent supporter of the value of education. We're honored to host Mr. de la Vega in today's event. This morning, Mr. de la Vega will engage in a moderated discussion with Dr. Ann Macy, who's the Edwards Professor of Finance in the College of Business. This will be followed by questions from the audience. So with that, please join me in welcoming Mr. de la Vega and Dr. Ann Macy.
Up from San Antonio, everything that I got.
There we go.
Love that song.
There we go. So that's a true Texas welcome. So thank you very much for coming, and thank all of you for being here. And it's nice to have a full crowd. So Obstacles Welcome, that's the name that you chose for your book. And that's a very interesting title and a way to look at your life. So I was hoping you would just take a moment and sort of explain the title and a little bit about why you chose Obstacles Welcome and how that fits into our theme today.
Yes, I strongly believe that you judge a person's character by how they deal with adversity. It's not during the good times that that character reveals itself. It's during difficult times, both on a business basis and on a personal basis. And obstacles, in my view, are always opportunities if you look close enough. In fact, I like to tell people that inside every obstacle, there's opportunity, but often we do the opposite. Instead of going to an obstacle, we try to walk away from them. And in doing so, you walk away in some cases from incredible opportunity. I remember early in my career when I was giving a very tough assignment to run our wireless business in Latin America. My friends all called me and said, Ralph, why is the company doing this to you? That region is full of problems. You've done a good job for the company. Why are they giving you such a lousy assignment? I said, that region is not full of problems. It is full of opportunities. And that assignment changed my career. And that is why I think that I encourage people to take on obstacles, because even the small ones, when you take them on and succeed, they give you the confidence that you can take the bigger obstacles in your life. And to me, adversity is something that is going to define you, whether you have faced it or not. You're going to sooner or later. And how you react is how you will be defined as a person, and in the case of business, as a leader. I faced it early in my career, and so did Stan Sigman. Stan Sigman was involved in a very, very difficult automobile accident early on. I know he suffered greatly, and throughout his career, he still had pain, but you would never know it. You know why? Because Stan Sigman or I will let any situation let you become a victim of the situation. The minute you let the situation make you a victim, then you can never succeed. You have to take adversity on, defeat it, and then you'll succeed in life and in business.
Okay, well, so you actually answered question number 2, which is what's the universal theme of obstacles welcome, which I think you touched on. I was hoping, you mentioned Latin America, and we were chatting earlier, and you told a wonderful story about having to bring the team together. And I was wondering if you could maybe discuss that again for these students, because that's a really good learning point, because these students are going to be in such a global work environment. And we keep saying that. We've been saying that the entire time I've been at WT, but I think that it's just increasing more and more. And they're even not just in a global economic environment, but they're in a global job market.
Absolutely. My experience in Latin America taught me the importance of teamwork. And when I was given that assignment, you have to understand that I was in charge of running 11 different countries in their wireless operations, and had 11 different chief executive officers and 11 different boards in each country. And each country thought they were an island to themselves. And yet we were facing global competitors that were operating as one. We were trying to operate in 11 different ways. And so my challenge was to tell these 11 different CEOs, who all had a mind of their own with different languages and different cultures, to say we need to act as one. Because business is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. I've never seen anything great accomplished by just one individual. But when you get individuals working together as a team, my experience is when you have a talented team of people that are inspired by a vision, they accomplish things that were thought to be impossible. And so my challenge in Latin America was to bring that team of people together. And as we were discussing, they were so different in their customs and their opinions that I had to let them storm. So we were in a hotel room for 2 days, locked the doors, and let them storm. But we came out of that storming session united as a team to move forward and to take on the challenges that were in front of us. And what happened after that is we accomplished turning that company around. That was incredible in 1 year, when everybody thought it would take multiple years to fix it. And that's what I mean, that when you have people that are really inspired by a vision, they accomplish amazing things. The team that Stan Sigman and I formed at Singular Wireless is one of those teams. We formed a team that was so together, so united, that even though the leadership changed from Stan to me after he retired, they kept on with the same strategy, the same culture, and we did amazing things in the industry simply because we were operating as one. So the message in building teams, and the message to the students here, is you need to learn as much as you can here. But one of the things that you are going to be expected when you go and operate a business, even if it's a business that you start yourself, teamwork is the key. Without it, few things get accomplished.
So, but within teamwork, then you do have to compromise. And so, in some of your discussions, you've mentioned about how when you worked with the Latin American CEOs, that they at first were not willing to, as you said, they had to storm because they were unwilling to compromise. So what were things that you did in that process to help recognize their uniqueness and help to lead to, because part of becoming a team is everyone has to buy into it. So it can't just
Yeah.
be the leader's view, it has to be the team's view.
That's it.
So how do you make that
Yeah,
change?
by the way, that's a great point. If I had not let them voice their opinions, some which were strongly held, and let them get that out, and then take it to a higher context, we would not have achieved it. I'll give you a simple example. In Latin America, you're familiar with Argentina and Brazil, two of the largest countries. Well, they're rivals when it comes to football, the soccer, and they're just passionate. It's just like somebody wearing a Brady Buccaneers shirt. It's just they are passionate, and so they viewed that they could not do the same things together. And for example, when we were trying to do one commercial for the whole region, the Brazilians thought it was, heresy to have anybody from Argentina be a part of that commercial. But what we finally agreed to do is there could be Argentinian actors or Brazilian actors, but the messaging and the promotions are the same. So we agreed to do things the same way, but with a little difference that recognizes the importance of the country's cultures. And you will find that whether you're in a different country, in a different state, or a different company.
So how many commercials did you end up filming that day?
11. But, it was beautiful to see the Brazilian actors come in and the Argentinian actors come in. And, it was just, it really highlighted to them. They then understood the power of being a team as opposed to fighting each other, competitors that were global in nature.
That's an interesting way, though, because what you did is you really did recognize the cultural sensitivities of each of those 11 countries, but you were able to be efficient from a business point of view with one script, one set of video production, one set. So
exactly. And Dr. Macy, by the way, when we merged AT&T Wireless and Singular Wireless in the largest all-cash merger in the history of the U.S. at the time, $41 billion, led by Stan Sigman. We had to put two different companies together that were culturally as far apart as you can get. I mean, very different. Some were like Singular was line-led. They put the authority on the line.
What does that mean?
The frontline employees
Okay.
and the local leadership, as opposed to AT&T Wireless, which was centrally led and managed so that the thinking and the strategy was all at the central level and the frontline people executed. Our method at Singular was the opposite of that. Is our frontline managers, we used to call them generals, because they had the power to run things locally. They did it a certain way. And it was our job and Stan's job to bring those two together, and to see it happen was unbelievable. One of the smallest things that we did, which in retrospect sent a signal to their team that we were willing to accept them, is at Singular we had the color orange. That was our color. AT&T Wireless was blue. So when we put the company together, we used orange and blue. We didn't say blue was no good. We actually took, and that was a signal to people that yes, we're willing to take some of what you brought to the table to form a team together.
It's an interesting idea because, when you look at within management theory, you look at mergers and acquisitions, that is the difficult part, is the blending of that. And so here's an interesting idea of just taking the color and the trademark and blending it to show that we are now a new team. So Brady wearing the Buccaneers jersey, to come back around to that.
Exactly.
So when you did do that merger, though, you tell some interesting stories about how you had 50 individuals for the top leadership positions coming in from each company, and you had to blend that. And so how does that work? Because now you're really dealing with, this can change the culture. You've worked so hard to create this culture. Just because you have everybody now, instead of wearing an orange shirt or blue shirt, they're still wearing a striped shirt. Okay, but now it's down to business, right?
Yeah, so let me explain. When we did the AT&T Wireless, Singular Wireless merger, which I mentioned, $41 billion in cash, okay? I tell people when we send that cash, all the ATMs must have taken a temporary halt because we were piping $41 billion. But the interesting thing is that we were merging two companies that were national in scale number 2 and number 3 in the industry to create a number 1. And we had dual operations in both companies. We had 2 CFOs, we had 2 CMOs, we had 2 general managers for West Texas.
Mhm.
And so we had to decide which ones we picked. And that's one of the most difficult decisions that Stan and I had to make. And we made it just the 2 of us, by the way, which really highlighted uh, Stan's leadership style. You know, he believed in getting involved with the people, and he and I interviewed 100 people to pick 50 from the 100. Some were singular wireless employees, and we knew them for many years. Some were new employees. And we had to make the choice, and Stan was insistent on this, is that we always have to pick the best person regardless of their affiliation. And we did that. And in fact, we named the top 50 leaders of the combined company on the very first day the merger was approved. That had never been done. Usually, you take your time. Stan and I visited every operation, and we interviewed with lawyers, by the way, because we were competitors. We interviewed their top leaders. And by the way, we did not ask them to bring us their resumes. We did not ask them. I wrote an article after that said, what I look for is not in your resume. I don't care what your grade point average is. Yeah, it's important. But I want to know what you have done to deal with adversity. I want to know what you've done to work with others. What is the toughest thing that you have faced? And we were trying to understand if the person we were going to put on the role was a person that would fit with our culture and our team. To me and to Stan, it was important to have people that were team players. That when we said we need to go this direction, after discussion, everybody has a chance to input, but once we decide, we move. And the agility that created and the trust that created in the organization is what allowed us to be as successful as we were. And just to give the students an idea, the team that we put together, once those 50 were selected, that team stayed together for 10 years. This is unheard of these days. The top leadership of the company, and what that team did in those 10 years is they grew revenues $50 billion. They grew EBITDA $23 billion. And they won the J.D. Power Award for the retail customer satisfaction 9 years in a row. I would say that's a pretty successful choice
Yes.
and a very successful team, but it highlights the power of teamwork and picking the best people regardless of where they came from.
And that has to be very difficult to do. So first off, you covered so many things I want to touch on in that, because that's a whole management class. So first off, let's go back to the start. You said something very interesting, and my students should be paying attention to this and saying, yep, that's on the exam next week, that you took the second and the third and you merged those to become number 1. So that's one of those important management ideas, is that it is typically that number 2 wants to be number 1, number 3 wants to be number 1. Sometimes we have to do it together. You know, and then the idea that you went around and you interviewed these individuals, and of course, I'm going to go ahead and put in a plug for high GPA, just so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to put in a plug for high GPA. But all of those individuals had already been successful, right? So the GPA helps get you in the door.
Yes.
And now, as you're going through your career, as you said at the start, you don't run away from adversity or obstacles, you run to them. So you were looking at people who are going to go to the opportunity, because you knew that creating this new combined company is very difficult. So there's going to be a lot of adversity, a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to clarify, I didn't mean to say that GPA is irrelevant, but whether it's a 3.6 or a 3.7 or a 3.7 to a 3.8, that doesn't make that big a difference in my view. Of course, to Dr. Macy, it may,
Yes,
or to you, it may, regarding how she grades you. But yeah, I think that the most interesting thing about that aspect, Dr. Macy, is also the fact that many of those same executives, after they went through our run with us, went on to be CEOs of their own organizations or CEOs within AT&T. I think more than 10
yes,
became CEOs of their own business. So we picked right. but we also develop them
There's
in
a
an
key.
appropriate way.
So that meant that over those years where you were the 10 years where they stayed together, think about that level of development of all of those managers. So what were some things that you did to help develop them?
So we did a few things. Number one, we would rotate them in different parts of the company so that they would understand all aspects of the company. Most companies have an idea that once you're an engineer, you can only do this thing. And we actually required our leaders to to sample things that they were not familiar with. So we would take a strategy person and put them to run call centers. And if that doesn't bring you humbleness, nothing will. I think running a call center is one of the most difficult things because you have a lot of human beings that you have to lead and inspire. You have customers that are calling you every day. You have an incredible amount of metrics. So finding the right metrics to guide by. And when you do that to people, it actually makes them better. If I can tell you a story, this is an interesting story. I took a strategy person that worked for one of the big four strategy firms who wanted to be an officer of the company and said, in order for you, to do well, you have to run a call center because that way you know if you can lead people. So I put him to run a call center. I checked up on him 60 days later, and I said, "How's it going?" And he says, "They don't like me." I go, well, how do you know? And he says, "They slashed my tires." So I go, well, that is better than a 360-degree feedback. You're doing something wrong, my friend. So I went in and I spent a day with him and his team, and he was not being humble. He was a very bright guy, but he was not listening and having the discourse with his team that I mentioned was critical. I coached him, and you know what? He changed. To his credit, when I moved him again in a couple of years, people hated to see him go. And just recently, he actually called me after not talking to him for probably 10 years to let me know that he was retiring from, and he was running a big operation with 45,000 people. And he said, "I wanted to thank you for giving me that opportunity. I didn't do it. It's he took the time to learn." And that to me is the key about leadership and how you grow leaders is I could tell you, I could give you a book to read, I could send you to a seminar, but nothing would have been better than having your tires slashed to give you a sense of reality and what it is like to lead people.
Well, and I think that also shows that those individuals that slashed the tire, well, wrong, were frustrated.
Yes.
Right. And so I think you used an interesting term there. You said he was not being humble. So why did you choose that word?
Well, I chose it for several reasons. Number one, Stan Sigman, as great a man as he was very humble. And I think there's something about this region of the country. I've just sensed this since I've been here, that this is a place where humility plays a part, where work ethic is important, where values are important. And that's why I think that the word is important because it says to your employees that you're humble enough to learn from them. And that was why I sent this gentleman there. I sent him there to learn, and he was not learning. But once he understood and he changed, then you have to be humble in order to get people to want to work for you.
So if we now go back to the teamwork idea, that's really one of the more effective ways to run a team is to recognize that it's a back and forth and the give. But why is it that you think that leaders sometimes, as they advance, stop listening?
That's a great question. I think you become insensitive when you're looking. The higher up you go, the more difficult it is, in my view, to go higher up in the organization and still be in contact with the people in the field. So I ran an organization, and so did Stan, that was anywhere from 70 to 80,000 people. That's a lot of people. How you keep in touch with what is happening at the front line? And I know what I did, I know what Stan did. He often went, and I often went and spent a day with the front line, whether it was a call center employee, a technician in a truck, or somebody in a retail store. And that, if nothing else, made you humble because you saw what our employees were having to go through. and they saw that you were taking an interest in them and listening to them. And I learned as much by going to retail operations, to call centers, as I ever would by sitting a day in my office, because I would know what it is that all the processes and all the things that we think how they're working, are they really working that way? Dr. Macy, I still remember going and getting in a truck with one of the individuals, and the first thing he asked me is, "Sir, do you want this like I'm supposed to do it or like I do it?" And so that is what you have to do. And I listened to what he had to say, and we had a great ride. But it's just without that, you don't really understand what the front line is feeling. And I think both Stan and I are a firm believer that you have to inspect what you expect, and you do that by being a leader that leads from the front. You're there checking the front lines and making sure that the tone you're sending from the top is being received appropriately by the frontline employees. There's a lot of transmission that happens between an executive sending the right tone and how it gets eventually communicated to the front lines. You will be surprised how miscommunication happens unintentionally.
Mhm. So that's an interesting idea. Inspect what you expect. So that seems to be, and then what if it's not the same, right? So inspect what you expect. Now the expectations are not matching what you inspect. So now what do you
So
do?
now what, the way I would approach it, okay, why didn't this work?
Yeah.
Is it because the instructions and the strategy was wrong, or it was implemented inappropriately? It could be any number of things, but you better make sure that you're checking along the way to find out where things are not going as you thought. And then you're supposed to come back and take action if it's not. I think that's the role of a great leader, is to listen to somebody, take the message back, and then fix things if it needed to be fixed.
Okay. So let's go back to that team that you put together, you and Stan, that was going to, for 10 years, incredibly successful, 9 years, JD Power, fantastic. Okay, so you have the excitement of the merger is occurring years 1, years 2. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot of blending. That's a lot of work that creates the teamwork. Now we're at year 6. Shouldn't there be infighting? Shouldn't these individuals be fighting each other a little bit? How are we all still pulling up the mountain? Because at some point in time, somebody wants to be promoted instead of somebody else, or we can't all be friends all the time, right?
Okay, so I'll answer that by going a little bit backwards and then forwards. But the team that I helped to form in Latin America that went through an incredible journey to success, even after I left that job, that team met the first Monday in December for every year for the next 10 years, together as a team in Atlanta. And they were flying in from different countries to meet, to also to buy gifts for their families at Christmas. But
That's why it's
they
December.
met 10 years in a row on Monday just to celebrate that we survived that ordeal. And that's the same thing with the Singular Wireless AT&T wireless team. I was just speaking yesterday before leaving here with the CEO of AT&T Communications, Jeff McElfresh. Jeff was a general manager in Phoenix that Stan and I placed in that job to help him develop. And he is now the CEO of AT&T Communications. And he was talking about how he's running AT&T Communications today using the same principles that Stan and I taught them when he was a general manager who had never had any line experience. And this is an example of how all the things that we talked about, how do you lead people, how do you grow a leader? We gave Jeff a small market because he didn't have experience, but he leveraged that to now he's running probably 150,000 people operation.
That's fantastic. So one of the key ideas there, if you're listening, is that you have to provide opportunities for those individuals to advance. And so you think about what he's saying there is that as you get over these obstacles, in essence, you gave them new obstacles.
Yes.
You gave them new obstacles, gave them new challenges, and said, okay, now go do this, and let them really, really flourish.
And Dr. Macy, Stan was really good about helping to build leaders. You know, we can talk all you want about their results. They've been outstanding. But I think if you were to ask Stan and I what we're most proud of, I think it's the people that we help to grow and build. Uh, because we designed the markets at Singular Wireless, so there would be 26 of them, 26 general managers. Some were small markets, some were medium, some were large. The people that were new to that business, we would start them in the small markets. We would never throw them into a New York or a Chicago if they've never done the job, but it gave us the chance to grow from Phoenix, Arizona, New Mexico to Dallas, to Texas, to the world. And it helped us to bring people who didn't have a background in leading others, and that's where they learn. And that's back to my thesis that you cannot teach leadership from a book. You cannot learn it by listening to an audio tape or watching a video. You have to experience it.
So that VPGM model that you just made a reference to, that allowed you to bring in some more non-traditional candidates, is it not? So how, again, what was the process of how you selected those people to now have the New Mexico market?
Well, that's a great question. I took pride, and I'm still taking pride of the fact that we allowed a lot of minorities and women to come into leadership positions by creating those markets. One of them, for example, was Jennifer Byrie. Jennifer Byrie went into a small market. I took her from finance and put her to run operations. She's never run operations. And she's now the chief financial officer of Time Warner Media. She did such a great job for us that the finance team pulled her back. And so it is good that if you put people in the right spot, if you coach them and develop them, other people want them. And that's what I have found. Almost everyone that we place on those key jobs has gone on to bigger and better jobs because of the experience we allowed them to have. We didn't create them. They did it themselves. It was facilitating people to be the best that they could be. If you take a team of people and you build them and you grow them, they will stay with you forever. And that's what we experienced at Singular Wireless.
That's fantastic. It seems as though part of that philosophy too is not just to pay it forward, but also pay it backwards. So it's very much creating a legacy, actually, a legacy of teams and a legacy of leadership through how you structured the modeling with the regionals.
Yeah, I think, in fact, our merger and our process were so successful that many of the other competitors copied them. They've never executed them as well as we did because you can only copy certain things. It's hard to copy your culture and your values and your humility. It needs to be the whole package. So part of the message that I wanted to bring here this morning is leaders are developed when you get the best education you can, like what you're doing here. And then you also learn the right values, whether you learn them at home, in school, or because of the community that you're in. Leadership is about both. You have to have the right values and you have to have the right knowledge to execute whatever you decide you want to do and do it well.
All right. You mentioned the merger again. I don't think I get to ask you financial questions, but I'd love to know why it was a $41 billion merger in cash. Why you didn't use debt? But
well, it's a complicated question, but let me tell you the scenario. This is, if I was to make a business movie, it would be about that merger. And we were competing with Vodafone, who was based out of the United Kingdom, to buy AT&T Wireless. And it was back and forth. They were bidding and we were bidding. And I remember being in my office at the night that the decision was going to be made with Stan, and we had two press releases ready to go. The one said, we won it, we're going to do some great things with this merger. The other one says, we didn't get it and we really didn't need it.
Good marketing either way. Good marketing either way.
I was the COO, so you have to be prepared for everything. So it must have been 10 or 11 o'clock at night when Stan comes in. You know, Stan is a very clear communicator, and he just said, we lost it, and he walked away. okay, my heart sank because we had worked so hard to try to make this work, and we lost it. So he went home. I stayed, and I just reflected on the new release I was going to have to issue. And I went home. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from Stan, and he says, "We want it. Get in here." If you know Stan, you immediately get dressed and go to work. But what happened was that in that interval, we were competing against Vodafone to get AT&T Wireless to sign our deal, and the simplest deal was to give them cash. That's what they wanted. And so it was increasingly higher bids until the last bid that we gave them was such that it was in the middle of the night here, was before the people in the UK woke up and before the board of Vodafone, which is based in the UK, woke up. And the criteria was they had to accept the $41 billion in cash within the hour. It expired within the hour. So I don't think it was a lot of financial engineering. It was just it was just like, and we won it, and it was exhilaration. That's all I can tell you, because from having lost it to having won it and having a strategy. So I think the 41 billion was what is the best, what is it what we need to do, our best and final offer. You have 1 hour to sign it, and they signed it, and by the time Vodafone woke up, it was too late.
That's great strategy. I feel like the Monopoly man was like that sack of money. That's like, you have 1 hour to
Yeah,
do that.
yeah.
That's an interesting story. That's not what I thought you were going to say. So I'm still having to process all that. Well, we want to go ahead and have questions from the audience. So if people have some questions, they kind of start to formulate that. So, and we'll have the microphones going. And so while the individuals come up and do that, I was hoping you could just take a moment and can you tell us a little bit about the story with AT&T and then with Steve Jobs and Apple?
Yeah,
This is a fascinating story.
the story about Steve Jobs and Apple, it depends on your point of view, where it's like you're watching a football game, the view from the end zone or the stands. So I'm giving you my view from being there firsthand. And the first thing I would tell you is the history of what led to success with the iPhone was a failure in a prior phone that we tried to develop with Steve Jobs called the Rocker. The Rocker was a joint venture between Motorola, between Singular Wireless, and Apple. It was the first phone back in the days that had 100 iTunes songs in the phone. And nobody had ever put songs, especially iTunes songs, in a phone. So we thought 100, that would knock it out. Well, we didn't talk to enough young people because they wanted like every song that's ever been made to be accessible to them. So even though we put a huge amount of effort, the phone that was made by Motorola made the phone. Apple brought the iTunes Music, and we brought the wireless connectivity. It was a market failure. It didn't sell anywhere. We had great commercials, but it didn't sell. So that, in my view, that failure is what prompted Steve Jobs to say, I can make a better phone than Motorola. And when he decided to make the phone, he called on us because we were good partners. We were good team players in rolling out the Rocker phone. So it's a great case of how that failure led to success. And even more so because Steve Jobs was so concerned about his proprietary design that it would not get out, that Stan and I could not tell the board of our companies what the phone looked like. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So we just told the board, this is going to be a game changer. What does it look like? I can't tell you, but you're going to like it. And it talked about the trust that Stan and I had built with the board, for the board to approve a multi-billion-dollar transaction without ever seeing the phone. And in order to do that, you need to have authenticity. Stan is A1 for authenticity. You have to have trust, and you have to have respect And that's what allowed the phone deal to work, like and that's why Singular Wireless, which became AT&T Mobility, why we won the phone. And we had a great team effort between us and Apple to launch it, because Apple at that time had never ever built a phone. For the young people here, you say Apple, iPhone, they're synonymous now, but in those days, they had never built a phone. So they relied on us to help them build a phone so that it worked properly. It had the right radio frequencies. It had the right radios in it. And that's the story of the iPhone.
And think about all the things that are unique within that too, because for one thing, Motorola gets cut out of the deal.
Yes.
So, and we can discuss that at a different time. But think about also then the idea of Steve Jobs, another fantastic innovator, learning from a mistake, learning from an obstacle. So a lot of that common theme, I think you're seeing through these examples. All right, could you tell us who you are and what's your major?
Hi, I'm Trinity Walker, and I am a pre-med major with the intention of going into psychiatry. And I'm wondering, so how did you get to the point where you were a top manager? I mean, my guess is that you said that you were an engineer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So how did you go from just being just getting your bachelor's degree to becoming a top manager, overseeing all these companies, overseeing this merger? How did you get to that point?
That's a great question. I would say a couple of things. Number one, I took on all the assignments that nobody else wanted. And I volunteered for the toughest assignments because I felt I would learn from them. I think that was the case. As an engineer, you're trained logically to do certain things. And one thing that I now recall going back that made a huge change in my life is I was the director of engineering for Bell South at the time, which would have achieved my dream. I was an engineer. I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I'm now in charge of all of engineering. And then the head of sales comes and says, Ralph, I think you would be a great salesperson. I want you to run my sales organization. And I go, but I've never done sales. And he says, no, her name was Judy North. She says, no, I think you can do it. So she gave me one of the biggest markets, and I learned how to sell. But it was awkward because I still remember the first thing I did in the sales group. It was, I still remember it like yesterday, St. Patrick's Day, and the sales team was doing a skit, and people were wearing kilts and all these kind of things, and they wanted me to wear like a green skirt, and I go like, no, because if I don't do well in sales, they'll never let me back in engineering if I do this.
And now there'd be a lot of pictures of you.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of pictures.
That.
That assignment and me accepting it and being willing to give up the things that I was comfortable with to go into a completely area that I was very uncomfortable with helped me to grow as a leader like you wouldn't believe. So you have to get uncomfortable sometimes to learn. I think my experience is the more uncomfortable you are, the more you learn because you're forced to learn. And it turned out that she was right. I could lead sales team. And in fact, I love sales, but I also love engineering. So it helped to bring out a side of me that I quite frankly didn't know I had because somebody had faith. She had faith that I could develop into a good salesperson.
That's fantastic. We have some other questions? Please go ahead and come on up. Oh, Mr. Wilder. What's your major, sir?
I would like to say retired, but not. Ralph, could you address the audience on your beginning from 10 years old that you discussed with us to high school? And the other thing I'd like for you to give to the audience, doesn't make any difference from what university you graduate. You have opportunities. You can be successful from WT versus Yale.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try to do that briefly. If you haven't detected it, I have an accent, okay? I was raised in Cuba, and at an early age, my family decided to leave Cuba to come to the United States because Cuba became a communist country. We lost the freedoms of speech that we had. My father's business was nationalized by the communist government. Uh, my family lived in a constant state of fear, and young kids like me at an age 10 were getting indoctrinated to turn their parents in if they did anything against the revolution. We were getting taken to different schools and being indoctrinated. So my mother and father decided to leave Cuba, leaving everything behind. You had to leave your home, your car, your bank account. You had to leave with clothes on your back. But it really highlights that people are willing to do that to come to the beacon of hope, freedom, and opportunity that is this great country of ours. And we thought that was the most difficult thing to do. We had no family in the US. But when we got to the airport, it was myself, my sister Barbara, and my mom and dad. I was 10 at the time. The militiaman that looked at our exit papers said 5 words that changed my life and my family's life forever. And those 5 words were, only the boy can go. Only my papers were correct. My family had to decide whether to send me ahead or they had to keep the whole family behind. We didn't have any family in the US, so my dad called a friend and asked them if they would look after Ralph for a few days until the papers got straightened out. I got on that airplane. I said goodbye to my parents, and I wouldn't see them again for 4 years. So I found myself in a new country with a new family. I didn't speak a word of English, and I didn't have a penny in my pocket. And I tell people I didn't even like the food here. The first food I got was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I said, they don't put meat in the sandwiches in the great country. So anyway, it was a very, very difficult time. I also wouldn't be here if it wouldn't be for my grandmother, that when I went to talk to my high school counselor, the counselor looked at my grades that were not that great. Family had no financial recourses whatsoever, so he told me, I know you want to be an engineer, Ralph, but you need to be a mechanic instead because you don't have the wherewithal to be an engineer. So I listened to that high school counselor. I quit regular school and went to trade school until my grandmother arrived, who was a teacher and knew the value of an education. And she was really mad at me for saying, I want to be an engineer, but you're going to a trade school. So I tell people, I don't say the words that she told me in Spanish when I explained that to her. But she always said the second thing I've always repeated, and that is, she said, Ralph, don't let anybody put limitations on what you can achieve. If you want to be an engineer, you can be an engineer. So I rebooted myself. I went back to high school. I finished high school. I got my engineering degree, and the rest is history. I got an engineering degree at a small school like West Texas, okay? And my message to you is, life is a journey, and it doesn't matter where you start. It only matters where you finish and what you do along the way and how you deal with adversity along the way. The education you're getting here is similar to the education that I received, similar to the education that many other great leaders have received. And my message to you is, don't let anybody put limitations on what you can achieve. You're getting as great an education here in West Texas as anywhere. Exert yourself, apply yourself, and make sure that you leave here and you keep learning your whole life. And if you do that, I can tell you that if you're from West Texas and if you're a Buffalo, you can do anything.
Thank you. That is perfect. I appreciate that. Well, most of these students have 11 o'clock class. You know, is there any, I mean, you sort of wrapped it up right there, but do you have a final piece of advice, or do you have anything that you would send them off with? Because you have a very fascinating story, and we appreciate you sharing it with us.
All I can tell you is that if you look at the man whose picture is behind me, Stan Sigman and I, if you were to look at us, we would look physically as different as two people could. But then if you look at what's important, is what is inside the person, you'd find some interesting traits. Stan Sigman married his high school sweetheart, Gary Lynn, and were married together for 54 years. I married my high school sweetheart, and we're now married 46 years. So it speaks to the value of ethics and the things that you do with your life. He moved 19 times with AT&T. I moved 14 times with AT&T. He's from West Texas, and I am from West Cuba. It doesn't get any better than that. So thank you very much. I feel very much at home here.
Thank you all very much for coming. I want to thank Dr. Abdullah for setting this up. I want to thank also, we have guests with us. We have Mr. and Mrs. Engler here, and we have David Wilder, three individuals that support the college dramatically. We also have a lot of other individuals here. So thank you to all of the students for coming. I hope you learned some lessons. And Mr.